The day my boss collapsed in the middle of the conference room, she was still gripping a pen and trying to finish a sentence no one else cared about. 1 second, Maren Whitlock was standing beside the glass wall, calmly explaining why our company could survive another brutal quarter, and the next, her knees gave way beneath her. The pen rolled across the polished floor as 8 executives stared in stunned silence, waiting for someone else to move. I was the only one who did. I caught her before her head struck the table, and as I held the woman everyone believed was unbreakable, I heard her whisper something that frightened me more than the collapse itself. She said she was sorry for becoming a burden. Before we continue, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel if you believe kindness can reach people who have forgotten how to ask for it, forgiveness can repair wounded hearts, and hope can give anyone a second chance. My name was Callum Pierce, and until that morning, I had worked for Maren for 11 months without ever seeing her admit weakness. She was 38, sharp-minded, disciplined, and known throughout the company for arriving before the cleaning staff and leaving only after every department had submitted its reports. She wore tailored suits in quiet colors, spoke without wasting a word, and could silence a room simply by lowering her voice. People called her cold when she wasn't listening. They said she cared more about numbers than people and joked that she probably scheduled her own emotions in 15-minute calendar blocks. I had laughed along a few times, though never comfortably, because I had noticed things they had not. I had seen her quietly approve extended leave for an employee caring for his sick father. I had watched her rewrite a harsh performance review so a struggling young mother would not lose her insurance. Once, when a warehouse worker's home flooded, Maren anonymously paid for a temporary apartment. She hid her compassion with the same determination other people used to display theirs. The paramedics arrived quickly, and sunlight flooded the conference room while they examined her. Maren tried to sit up before they were finished, insisting she had only skipped breakfast and stood too quickly. One paramedic told her that exhaustion, dehydration, and prolonged stress were not minor inconveniences. They were warnings. She refused transportation to the hospital only after promising to contact her physician immediately and remain under observation for the rest of the day. The executives drifted away as soon as they realized she was not dying. Within minutes, their concern returned to quarterly forecasts and client calls. I stayed. Maren sat in a chair near the window, pale and visibly embarrassed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I brought her water and the sandwich I had packed for myself. She stared at it as though accepting food from another person required a legal agreement. Then she thanked me, so softly I almost did not recognize her voice, that I cancelled the remainder of her meetings despite her objections and drove her home under the bright midday sun. She lived in a restored gray house at the edge of a quiet coastal town, beautiful from the road but strangely lifeless up close. There were no flowers on the porch, no family photographs visible through the windows, no signs that anyone lingered there long enough to make a mess. Inside, everything was immaculate. A single mug sat beside the sink. One coat hung near the door. The silence seemed heavier than the furniture. Maren tried to dismiss me after assuring me she would rest, but when she walked toward the kitchen, she swayed and caught the counter. I steadied her, then made soup from the few ingredients I found in her cupboards. She watched from the breakfast table, uncomfortable with being cared for and unable to hide how desperately she needed it. While the soup warmed, I tried to lighten the mood. I told her she could not keep living as though sleep were a character flaw, and I joked that maybe she should let someone care for her before she frightened the entire company again. I expected a dry remark or one of her restrained smiles. Instead, she looked directly at me, and something in her expression shifted. The authority vanished. The guarded distance disappeared. For the first time, I saw not my boss but a lonely woman standing at the edge of an admission she had carried too long. She said she had been hoping I would. The words settled between us with a weight neither of us knew how to lift. Sunlight crossed the table and illuminated the exhaustion beneath her eyes. I stopped stirring the soup. Maren looked away immediately, as though ashamed of her honesty, and said I should forget she had spoken that I could not forget. I also could not pretend the situation was simple. She was my boss, responsible for my salary, my evaluations, and every professional opportunity one had inside the company. More importantly, I had spent years rebuilding my life after becoming the caretaker in a relationship that left me emotionally empty. My former fiancée, Laurel, had needed constant rescue but offered affection only when she feared losing me. By the time our engagement ended, I had learned to confuse love with exhaustion. Maren knew none of that. She only knew I was dependable, calm under pressure, and willing to remain when others walked away. I wondered whether she cared about me or merely about the safety I represented. That afternoon, I stayed until her physician called and confirmed that her condition was serious enough to require rest but not hospitalization. Before leaving, I placed food in her refrigerator and wrote down a schedule for hydration and medication. She thanked me without mentioning her confession again. For the next week, Maren worked from home while the office transformed her absence into gossip. Some people believed she had suffered a nervous breakdown. Others claimed the board intended to replace her. Our chief financial officer, Grant Mercer, began quietly taking control of meetings and speaking as though Maren's recovery had already failed. I visited her only for essential documents, maintaining a careful distance even when every part of me wanted to ask what she had meant. Each time I arrived, the house looked a little less empty. A blanket appeared on the sofa. Fresh fruit sat in a bowl. Once, I found her standing near an open window, smiling at the sound of children riding bicycles along the street. She admitted she had not noticed them before. Rest was forcing her to see the life she had been outrunning. On the fourth visit, I found a framed photograph on her desk that had not been there previously. It showed Maren at 25 beside a younger woman with the same gray eyes and dark auburn hair. They were laughing on a sunlit pier, their arms wrapped around one another. Maren noticed me looking and explained that the woman was her sister, Felicity, who had died in a car accident 12 years earlier. Their parents had passed away within the following 6 years, leaving Maren as the final member of a family that had once been noisy, affectionate, and inseparable. Felicity had called her on the morning of the accident, asking Maren to leave work early and meet her for lunch. Maren had refused because she was preparing for a promotion. She knew logically that meeting her sister would not necessarily have prevented the crash, but guilt had convinced her that work was the last thing she had chosen over someone she loved. After that, she stopped allowing herself to need anyone. Ambition became punishment, and loneliness became proof that she would never again fail someone by choosing the wrong priority. Her confession changed the shape of everything. I finally understood why kindness embarrassed her and why collapse felt, to her, like becoming a burden. She had built an identity around being useful because usefulness did not require vulnerability. I sat across from her and told her what I had learned after Laurel left: care given freely is love, but care demanded as proof is captivity. Maren listened without interrupting. I admitted that her words in the kitchen had affected me, but I could not become a secret comfort hidden inside an unequal professional relationship. She deserved support that was not tangled with power, guilt, or dependency. I deserved to know that I was wanted as a person rather than needed as a lifeline. Her face tightened with disappointment, but she nodded. She said she respected me too much to ask me to sacrifice my boundaries. Then, with visible effort, she promised to speak with a therapist, reconnect with old friends, and build a life that did not depend entirely on work or on me. Maren returned to the office 2 weeks later under a blaze of afternoon sunshine, and Grant immediately challenged her authority. During a leadership meeting, he presented a restructuring plan that would eliminate dozens of jobs while rewarding senior executives with retention bonuses. He claimed the cuts were necessary because Maren's absence had revealed dangerous inefficiencies. I expected her to respond with the ruthless precision that had made her successful. Instead, she asked the department heads to leave the room, then confronted Grant privately with documents proving he had inflated projections to justify the layoffs. He had assumed exhaustion made her weak. What he failed to understand was that recovery had made her clear. Maren terminated him that day and presented the board with an alternative plan that reduced executive bonuses, preserved every hourly position, and created emergency wellness leave for employees facing medical or family crises. The board resisted until she offered her resignation rather than sign a policy she believed would punish the most vulnerable people in the company. They approved her plan before sunset. Her leadership changed gradually after that. She still expected excellence, but she stopped treating sacrifice as evidence of loyalty. Meetings became shorter. Lunch breaks became normal rather than suspicious. She hired an operations director to share her workload and created a confidential employee assistance fund using part of her annual bonus. More unexpectedly, she began sharing small pieces of herself. She placed Felicity's photograph in her office. She joined a weekend grief support group that met on Saturday afternoons. She invited an elderly neighbor for coffee and started tending the neglected garden behind her house. I watched these changes with admiration, but I did not confuse them with a promise. We remained professional, kind, and careful. The growing affection between us lived in restrained smiles, meaningful pauses, and conversations that ended before either of us crossed the line. 6 months after her collapse, Maren requested a meeting in her office. Sunlight poured across the carpet, and the windows were open to the mild spring air. She told me the board had approved my transfer to a newly created project management role reporting to the chief operating officer instead of to her. The promotion came with a substantial raise and had been recommended by 3 department heads based on my work, not by Maren alone. She had intentionally removed herself from the final decision. I stared at her, understanding what she had done. She had not used her power to draw me closer. She had used it to give me freedom. Maren said she wanted me to know that whatever happened next, my career would remain entirely my own. Then she asked whether I would meet her for lunch on the public terrace across the street, not as her employee, not as the person who had caught her when she fell, but simply as Callum. I agreed, though fear followed me into that first lunch. We sat beneath a white canopy while the city moved around us in bright afternoon light. Maren did not ask me to rescue her. She spoke about therapy, grief, the friends she had begun calling again, and the guilt she was learning to release. I told her about Laurel and the part of me that still believed affection would eventually become obligation. We did not make dramatic promises. We simply told the truth. Over the following months, our relationship unfolded carefully. We visited museums on Sunday mornings, walked along the harbor after early lunches, and spent long afternoons working in her garden. When she struggled, she did not hide it, but she also did not place the responsibility for fixing it in my hands. When I withdrew out of old fear, she did not chase or manipulate me. She gave me room and trusted me to return. We were not saving each other. We were learning how to stand beside each other without disappearing. The greatest turning point came on the anniversary of Felicity's death. Maren asked me to accompany her to the pier where the photograph had been taken. The day was clear and windy, and sunlight flashed across the water. She carried a small bundle of white flowers and stood silently at the railing for several minutes. Then she admitted she had spent 12 years believing happiness would betray her sister's memory. She had punished herself with loneliness because grief had convinced her that suffering was the purest form of love. I reminded her that Felicity had called to invite her to lunch, not to ask her to spend the rest of her life refusing joy. Maren cried openly for the first time in front of me. She placed the flowers into the water and forgave the younger version of herself who had made an ordinary decision without knowing tragedy was approaching. When she reached for my hand, she did not cling to it. She simply held it. A year after the conference room collapse, Maren and I returned to the same building for the company's annual community luncheon. Employees brought their families, children ran through the courtyard, and the woman once described as heartless spent most of the afternoon serving food beside warehouse workers and receptionists. She laughed easily now. Not constantly, not carelessly, but honestly. During her speech, she did not mention profits first. She spoke about how a strong company was not one that demanded people ignore their humanity, but one that protected it. She thanked the employees who had shown patience while she learned that leadership was not the same as carrying everything alone. Then she looked at me across the courtyard, and I understood that her gratitude extended beyond the office. Later, beneath the warm daylight, she stood beside me near the garden wall and reminded me of the joke I had made in her kitchen. She said she had once believed being cared for meant surrendering control. Now she understood it meant trusting someone without handing them the burden of becoming your entire world. I told her I had once believed loving someone meant proving my devotion through exhaustion. She had shown me that the right kind of love did not consume a person's strength, it helped restore it. We had both entered each other's lives carrying old wounds, and neither of us had healed the other by force. Healing had come through boundaries, honesty, patience, and the courage to accept kindness without turning it into debt. Before this story ends, please leave a meaningful comment sharing what you believe real care should feel like. Should love rescue us, or should it remind us that we are strong enough to heal while someone walks beside us? Your words may reach someone who has spent years believing they must suffer alone. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. Maren and I eventually married in the garden behind her once silent house on a bright summer afternoon. There were flowers along the porch, children laughing near the fence, friends filling every room, and Felicity's photograph resting beside a vase of white roses. Maren did not erase her grief, and I did not erase my fear. We simply stopped allowing the past to make every decision for us. The woman who once apologized for becoming a burden learned that needing others did not make her weak. The man who once believed care always came at the cost of himself learned that healthy love could leave both people more whole. And every morning after that, whenever sunlight entered our kitchen and Maren reached for my hand across the table, I remembered the day she fell, the joke that became a confession, and the quiet truth that changed both our lives. Sometimes the strongest people are not waiting for someone to save them. They are waiting for someone gentle enough to show them that they are finally safe to stop saving themselves.